Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My own discussion this morning is sourced from the Environment and Natural Resource Management field, and the topic is the implications of Forest Stewardship Council certification scheme linked to international markets on poverty alleviation and natural resource management. The Forest Stewardship Council is an international, independent, multi-stakeholder, non-governmental, and not-for-profit organization that was formed to support and encourage responsible forest management through forest certification. And forest certification here is a voluntary tool, market-based mechanism that supports responsible forest management. What we are going to look for is to see what does this mean to about 1.6 billion poor tropical people who depend solely on forest. And what does this mean? What does certification mean to an environment that is critically endangered? We are going to follow this process. This outline represents the chapters and the process which the project was formulated. And the introduction, we are going to start with a problem statement. The problem statement is actually a practical illustration of a micro level, at a micro level, of what really takes place in the tropical area. And I decided to use my personal life experience as a child born in the community forest as the problem statement. Why? Because I consider that tropical poverty is the major cause of deforestation, which FSC was formed or was created to combat. And how does it operate? This is a natural forest, a thick forest. First, the government gives licenses to economic operators. They come in, they select their timber. Then we came in, my community and my family, which we depended on, we slashed the rest, we burn it, and we plant. And after that, you see that valley, big rivers which existed there are no more. Now this community is seriously in total poverty because the fertility of this area could only sustain for 2 years. And therefore, here we are going to see the purpose of this project is to do a benchmarking of FSC practical demonstrations on the field to the principles and criteria which FSC uses as a measure or as a guideline through which economic operators can use for forest management. And the type of research which I decided to do an impact assessment to assess the level at which FSC has been able to impact benefits to the forest dependents and to the environment as a whole. We are going to look first at the conceptual perspective of FSC. There we see how does FSC operate. We see FSC is in the middle, the certification system. The applicant is below, and FSC works through two processes. Either it is extractive, forest management certification at the natural forest, or the manufacturing process. The applicant applies to the auditor, and the auditor, based on standards created by FSC, comes in, inspects the forest, the natural forest, and if it is well maintained in accordance to the standards, a certification is issued. Or at the manufacture process, whereby a chain of custody certification can be issued to an operator to trace the source of wood, that the wood is sourced from a natural forest that is well managed. So you have a certification that you can trace the source of the wood right up to the manufacturing level to the market point. And you have, and at that level, you have the FSC initials where you can put on the wood as a stamp, signifying that this wood is sourced from a responsible forest. As such, you, therefore, as an economic operator, you are striking a balance between profitability and environmental benefits. We see on this graph, the private economic operators, in as much as they long for insatiable and competitive profits, the horizontal axis, they depict their private benefits, and the horizontal, they represent the environmental benefits and the benefits to the community. So the blue line in the middle represents a win-to-win level whereby economic operators must try to strike a balance at that level. But hence, as we are advancing, we will discover that many of these operators will not attain this level. Why? Because of the rule of externalities. Which are the externalities? We see here the European Union. They are the highest importers of tropical timber, but 30% of their wood is illegally sourced. How is it possible that FSC can fight the European Union? The environmental war, the forest war is an environmental war, and it is not possible for FSC to be able to fight the EU. Again, we see only 14% of cost deforestation is at the level of FSC, which means over 70% of deforestation is beyond FSC's control. It's poverty-stricken people who are there responsible for it. And again, maybe some economists here will want to debate with me. I try to bring Malthusian's economic theories of the 17th century to prove that even though Malthusian's theory was criticized, that it was a fallacy. Why? Because Malthus said that population rises at a geometric progression, and food production increases at an arithmetical progression. And at a certain point, population would overtake food production and people will suffer since land is fixed. And scientists criticized Malthus in the 18th century that technology can improve food production. But from my own perspective, I discovered that if technology has failed anywhere in the world, technology has failed to be able to produce the number of trees that can replicate the number of trees that are being destroyed every day. Even if that is being done, the animals that are in the forest can never be produced by technology. Notwithstanding these circumstances or these externalities, FSC has continued to reap benefits for the community. And the only institution that can give us assurance that FSC has been doing well is the International Tropical Timber Organization, which came up with these statistics early this year, that as in 2005, 69 million hectares of land were sustainably managed in the tropical region. But in 2010, 183 million hectares, which is at least about 200% improvement. Even though certification of tropical forest still remains at the level of 12.44%, notwithstanding, we perceive that they are growing, as depicted by this graph. This graph shows that in 2009, the number of forest management certifications and chain of custody certifications were about 950, and by 2011, they increased to about 1,012. This is an indication that people are increasingly showing more interest in certification, especially when companies like IKEA, Johnson's & Johnson's, Nikkei, Starbucks, when they decide when their policy, like these companies, they rely solely on certified wood, and when they rely solely on certified wood, the demand for certification continues to increase. So in the final analysis for the benefits, I made this analysis from a randomly selected 9 case studies all over the world. I realized that 44% of companies that actually go into certification embed corporate values into their system, that they have accepted that they are going to meet up with the standards of FSC. We find about 22.3%, they are still for business as usual, but then they are very conscious that in order to get to profit, in order to sell their wood in the international market where increasingly certified wood is demanded, you must be able to meet to the standards of the poor people, the poor community forest dependents, and you must be able to meet with some strategic forest management systems. But then we find about 33%, there are still somewhere they really do certification because they are under pressure to do it, and most of them, they don't actually go to the value chain, they don't actually follow the value chain or to the supply chain to see how the forest workers or the forest dependents are really being treated. And in as much as FSC is succeeding, I tried to investigate some of the challenges that they face. These challenges are challenges that, as long as they exist, they serve as a barrier or as a limitation to FSC system achieving progress. And some of these challenges are what? Distribution of environmental costs and benefits. Some of the poor people in the forest areas, like indigenous people, forest workers, they don't really feel the trickle-down effect of the profits that come in from certification. Why? Because some governments, they have bottlenecks. You have a strong elitist system that these profits don't trickle down to the beneficiaries. And when they don't trickle down to the forest dependents, to the forest occupants, they continuously invade the forest and they destroy the forest through their subsistence agriculture. Another one is the structural and institutional challenges. In the tropical region in particular, we find natural capital being the land. And so long as the government doesn't give access to people to land, people continuously to invade the forest as the only free gift of nature. And people continuously ask the purpose or their benefits from conservation. Like World Wide Fund, GTZ, when they conserve a forest, the inhabitants around keep on asking, what are our benefits from this? And when they don't see all the benefits coming, they continue to invade the forest. And another one is inadequate barriers for illegal wood. So long as there are inadequate barriers, people continue to smuggle wood unethically. With these challenges, I decided to look at some of mitigation strategies that could, if FSC implements them in their policies, perhaps they could mitigate and possibly improve their system. And I decided to select one, gender. Going through FSC documents and all their reports, I never saw the word gender mentioned anywhere. But then, if I were to have an opportunity to meet FSC, nowadays, if we look at the tropical forest, which is mostly endangered, the highest people who are closest to forest in their day-to-day life activities are the women. They depend on the forest. And once they are not included in any processes, in any management systems that concern deforestation or forest management, those projects are bound to fail. And those are some of the limitations that I saw that if FSC, if they don't implement strategies like forest, like gender, their projects may still continuously be a problem. Community forest management, I use a case study approach, and I saw like Mexico, where community forest management, which the government has actually implemented into its system and given powers to the community, it is easier for certification to operate in community forest management because the people participate, they are more responsible, and they know that the benefits of this forest come to them. But a case like Cameroon, where community forest management is on quotes, the community people don't have access to the forest, they don't feel responsible, and they don't have any concern about the forest. So my suggestions are that if FSC with local governments can implement community forest management practically, then the situation might change. I tried to investigate and see why conservators like World Wide Fund, GTZ, WCS, why they are succeeding. They are succeeding because of an integrated approach. And if FSC integrates such projects, such concepts into its approach, they may do better. I also tried to look at strategic environmental assessment and economic service valuation. What is the importance? The importance of this is that if the forest and the ecosystem services are not equated in monetary terms, the local poor people, the local poor farmers, the local poor governments, they will never understand the importance of a forest, because increasingly they know that the forest is only beneficial through the trees and the land. So the point is, if the forest as a whole is monetized, then the people will value it. What do I mean? When you look at the examples here, Spain, in 2006, there was a project to transfer water from the Hebrew Basin. And this project was to be sponsored by the European Union. But this project had to fail. Why? Because when the University of Zaragoza and the World Wide Fund, they calculated and monetized the importance of the ecosystem value of that area, the socialist government used this as a campaign tool, and they came into power in 2006. Why? Because they proved to the public that ecosystem services could be more valuable than every other thing. In Costa Rica also, it happened the same in 1997. And again, another illustration is the Stern Review, which today is an important instrument in climate change. These examples, they show that if the tropical forest, which is highly endangered, is equated into monetary terms and given the value to the people will understand its value, and they may shift their responsibility from it. But then, from the whole report, I realized that a lot of things are still hanging, because the question of sustainable development and sustainable forest management remains a debated issue. To me in particular, I tried to criticize a lot of things from it. For example, the tropical forest, which the British Commission called our common future, 40 years of solution-based actions have not been reached by the intergovernmental actions. And it is only FSC and some of the conservators which are struggling now to meet up with some of these issues. I also looked at legalized defense of indigenous people's rights. Article 26, 32, and 31 of the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous People's Rights states that indigenous people, they own the forest. The forest belongs to them, and no action should ever be taken on the forest without their consent. But then, increasingly, the forest becomes endangered. In 2010, at Cancun, we saw millions of indigenous people marching and protesting about the deforestation of the forest, which they believe they are conservators and it is their home. And most of these points, I tried to criticize some of the actions of intergovernmental actions. And looking below, I discovered that increasingly some of the developing countries, they are gaining more consciousness, and with like a situation which I saw in Congo Democratic Republic, where oil companies, they came in and they wanted to exploit oil in the natural park, but then Worldwide Fund, they stood their grounds and they supported the government, and at least the forest was protected and the vegetation secured. In the conclusion and my perspectives, I tried to look at the opportunities that FSC has. And from the opportunities, I see that FSC has a strong opportunity to succeed and to do more. And the opportunity is that it is a member of ISIL. ISIL is an international association of certification companies like the Marine Stewardship Council. And they form a bundle, they are in a bundle that they can fight most of their strategies together. FSC has good friends like WWF, GTZ, World Council, WCS, World Conservation Society, the Rainforest Alliance. These are strong conservators that, because FSC has allied with them, it helps them to work together to achieve a greater force. But then FSC is being criticized by some NGOs. Why? That FSC, because FSC, they do auditing once a year. So some of these NGOs, they criticize FSC that once a year auditing is not enough, that many things still go wrong in the community. But then the greatest threat to FSC is poverty-related deforestation, which from the assessment, I discovered that 85% of deforestation is poverty-related. You look at that graph, 48%, this information is sourced from the UNFFC. 48% is subsistence agriculture. 32% is commercial agriculture, which is still related to poverty. Then 5% is firewood, and 1% others. So the point here is that these are the intergovernmental institutions. They have a stronger force to fight poverty. And if they together they fight poverty on the other side, and FSC and the conservators, they are fighting on ethical deforestation, then deforestation can attain a certain level. But then this question has risen up to the European Union, to US, but they continue to insist that because the intergovernmental panel for climate change, they came out with these figures that to reduce deforestation by half by the year 2020, it will cost 15 to 25 billion euros per year. But then the OECD countries, they said it is too expensive for them to meet up. But then when you look at how much the EU spent in 2008, 300 billion for military defense, and the US, 696 billion for military defense, then you cannot reconcile these two situations. How is it difficult to spend 15 to 25 billion on deforestation when you can spend more than 300 billion a year on military defense? And those are some of the reasons why I tried to debate, and I said the issue of sustainable development remains a critical issue to come to a conclusion. And again, I tried to, in the conclusion, I tried to look at the side of the third world countries. Looking at the third world countries, you see most of the governments, once they are elected into power, they are only looking at the door to go out. Their time frame, their management system depend on the election timetables, and within 4 or 5 years, the government wants to amass all that they can do for themselves, and the issue of sustainable development remains a fallacy to them. And I thought that if the intergovernmental actions and local governments, they don't think about the poor people, what it means to adapt their own lives, because finally, the only solution to deforestation is adaptation, adapting the people's life to another system of life. But then when we look at what the European Union, the international organizations, they preach different things and practice different things. So, what is sustainable forest management and sustainable development to a poor farmer who depends only on forest? We poor farmers, we are only struggling to put food on our tables. This is a very important statement that every poor farmer in the community will say. They are only struggling to put food on their tables. And the only way to put food on their table is to deforest the land and put their crops for their children. No comment.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. A very good presentation, and I think credit to you for being able to speak by yourself. I mean, individual presentations obviously have that extra challenge, having 20 or 25 minutes. Just maybe remember, or a reminder to everyone about the time. There's 20 minutes for each group, and that is important as well, that you try to finish your presentation within that time limit. I think. I mean, you're very knowledgeable about the topic, which is quite impressive. I mean, it's not something we do cover FSC during the course, but I mean, you obviously went the extra mile in trying to understand a bit better the implications. You're passionate about it, so I think that's very good. I think I felt a bit overwhelmed at times with data and information, and it wasn't too clear to me what were you trying to, in the end, to convince us about. And I think maybe that there was room for extra clarity on what was the key messages you were trying to share with us. I think there's a lot of very good information and very good data. And the other thing I felt it would be interesting to hear from you is, given your knowledge now about FSC and international standards and deforestation, you started your presentation talking about your own kind of family background and your community and how the relationship with the forest was. And so having all what you've seen with this project, all what you've learned during these past months, I mean, how would you see your community maybe doing things different in order to, guarantee putting that food on the table, as you mentioned? Obviously, we don't have half an hour now to talk about that, which probably is a question that would deserve a lot of time, but, briefly, it would be interesting to have your views on that.
I admire one thing, the example of Costa Rica, because Costa Rica today is one of the best, I should say, is the best ecotourism. And before 1997, they had the highest deforestation in the world, one of the highest. But from 1997, they employed a system of payment of ecosystem services, whereby they evaluate your forest, they ask you how much this forest can be paid so that you don't deforest it. They calculate it, and a small tax was added to the taxation policy, and this tax was preserved, or this tax was directed to payment of ecosystem services. That is something like adaptation. I have been thinking about that if tropical countries could imitate what Costa Rica has done since 1997, because Costa Rica today, I think they have a lot of money from ecotourism, and I admire it, and there is no other issue for me at this critical moment that I admire for tropical countries than Costa Rica, because the people just need to know the value of forest, the value of ecosystem services, that this forest protects important resources that can, if monetized, they can earn a lot of income for them, and they will protect and preserve the forest. Secondly, people need to be adapted, their standards, the agricultural system in the tropics needs to be adapted. It needs to be adapted because they need intensive methods of cultivation. That is why in my debated issues, I criticize the structural adjustment program and the Bretton Woods system. Why? Because instead of adapting the people to an agricultural system that can be intensive, they preach only about food security, but practically what is going on is food self-sufficiency. People are only struggling to feed today, they are not thinking about tomorrow. And if the system of agriculture is adapted, like what happened before the structural adjustment program, then I think many more things will happen. So those are the two major things that I am thinking that if done, people might divert their attention from the forest a bit and allow the forest to breathe.
You're describing an enormous problem for which FSC is dealing with only a very small part. Are you saying that FSC has failed, that there is very little point in continuing with FSC given the enormous scale of the problem and the small scale of FSC? Or are you saying that FSC is a success, but that we need many other things to happen as well?
Yeah, good. That's why I said in the conclusion that FSC is on track. But then, poverty remains a big problem, which needs the involvement of intergovernmental actions. That they have good resolutions, but these resolutions need to be translated to solutions, to solution-based actions. That if poverty is attacked the other way, then the issue of deforestation, FSC is fighting, FSC is for responsible forest management. But then FSC is focused because the topic is about poverty alleviation and sustainable and responsible forest management. The assessment is to see if FSC policy can reduce poverty. But finally, the evaluation is, the results are that FSC on its own part, they are doing their best in accordance to their principles and criteria and in accordance to their mission. But their best is not enough for poverty alleviation because there are many other externalities. Like in chapter 3, there are other externalities which need to be tackled alongside so that FSC can attain its, so that the objective of poverty alleviation can be fully attained.
So did you think about putting together all of the different actions, whether it's legislation, community action, certification, agricultural practice, logging, and putting it all together to see what the effect might be overall as a sort of a bigger set of actions rather than just looking at FSC, or was your focus only on FSC?
Yeah, in the detailed report, there is, sorry. in the detailed report, there is a measure point for IUCN next year, when we have the third Earth Summit. All NGOs now, they are already preparing themselves to maybe to fight a common cause in the Earth Summit in Korea, in South Korea next year. And I believe FSC is one of them that is joining the other international NGOs, maybe to represent an issue of tropical deforestation at the conference. And I looked at it as a major step that if it is well done in 2012, then deforestation might have some solutions.
Hello, Martin. Well, first of all, congratulations for the project. I think that you have finally took a real huge issue, deforestation, forests, and finally to try to have a complete knowledge about what is happening is a real challenge. But I think that you have done very well, and you have a very good project that allows you to probably develop your professional career in linked to the forest in your country. And I think, especially for me, this project has the value that you have recopilate a lot of information. You have also analyzed this information, and finally you have very good conclusions about, especially what you were talking about before. FSC is not the only one solution, it's just a tool, and we need other activities from governments and other international institutions. But especially this year, that is the International Year of the Forest, I think, at least for you, it is a very nice experience and a very nice opportunity to have this information in your project, your final project, and I think it's going to open you a future in forests in your country, so congratulations for that.
Thanks.